Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about actually one of the viewers' comments on my last video. He asked if I had any more expensive IEMs, and compared to my last review, which was like the $9 Sonys. Yeah, I do have some more expensive ones, but nothing that I would actually call expensive. Nothing in the kind of more than $100, $150 range. And I said, well, I sort of haven't gone down that rabbit hole of spending because I have a V30 phone, I have Tidal, music, Spotify, and I wasn't really in the mood to start upgrading, my source, my cables, my music, all these things that I thought I would really have to do because now that I have a $150 pair of earphones, I should, have some upgraded other equipment. But his opinion was no, not really. The V30 is still a fine quad dock. It's super nice source. Music-wise, he said, well, you're not really going to tell the difference between Spotify 320 and FLAC, and we'll kind of go down that rabbit hole in a minute. And but he definitely said go upgrade to some more expensive pairs, and has some great suggestions, and I think I am going to go down that rabbit hole at least. But I do want to talk about whether you really can you tell the difference between FLAC and Spotify. And I personally use Tidal, like I've talked about in other videos. I use MQA on Tidal, and definitely one of my favorites. But when it comes down to FLAC, and do you really want to pay for your music again if you're already paying for Spotify or Tidal? I do have some, at least kind of a checklist that says, well, let me go research this actual CD and say, well, because in general you can't say, well, FLAC is always better, because at some point FLAC may just be the same as what you have. But there are some things that you can actually research, and so we'll kind of go down that path. And kind of my first check is, it's called dynamic range, and what it really is, and they actually Metalify says it in kind of the most simplest way, it's the difference between the softest and the loudest instruments or sounds of a track. So whether you call it the crest to the floor or the min to the max, you're always looking to see what in this recording, what is the max value and what is the min value. And what is that range? Does that range actually exceed 16 bits into 24 bits or not? So dynamic range kind of gives you this simplistic, DR1 through DR10 categories, which sort of spells out, so you don't have to go there and run the test yourself, whether the recording was dynamically compressed to the point where the FLAC really is not that much different than an MP3 at 320. So, and that's from the factory, not measuring what's coming out of Spotify or an MP3 or something like that. This is strictly what the dynamic range compression was when it was mastered. So now that you kind of got a DR score, you go back and look and say, oh, well, here's the new Tool album, and if we go to HD tracks, it comes in FLAC, 96 hertz sampling, and 24-bit FLAC, right? So the problem is they don't really tell you, there's no quality ratings on anything from HD tracks. They're just simply selling it. And so at that point you're like, well, it's an audiophile, 96 kilohertz, 24-bit. It's obviously better than what's coming out of Spotify. But if you actually go through and research what the DR scores are, so there's a website called DR Database, and you can actually find it at loudness-war.info. You'll kind of see a breakdown, and the Tool might be kind of a bad example because it's brand new, it just came out today. But you'll see scores like this, and they'll actually measure each track and assign each track a score. So you can kind of see that, almost see it. Let me see if we can bring that a little closer. So they color code these you've got your max track. Green is what you think it is, green lit. That is good. Red is bad. So these are kind of a mix of oranges through reds, a couple high, nice oranges and reds. So where people sort of make a cutoff is DR5 is, I think on the list it actually shows up as red. So DR5 is about the minimum you would ever consider FLAC, and that's probably too low for most people. That's about where I start getting interested at all. But yeah, to be honest, DR5 is probably, if it averages out DR5, it's not really worth your money to go through and get that version. This guy, you can see his actually album DR is a 9, and a lot of people in different forums, probably, I didn't check Metal-Fi, but Metal-Fi does reviews and gives you DR scores, and lots of people have been waiting for the CD and talking about it. So I think probably a high potential for buying there with a DR score like that, at least, if FLAC is going to be your thing. And so one of the albums that I've been listening to a lot, especially on reviews, Dido is still on my mind, right? So it does have one song that actually hits a 10, but in general we're kind of at the 6, 7, 5 range. And I like the CD a lot, so I actually have it in FLAC. But is it that much different than the Tidal MQA version? Yeah, probably not, but still a pretty awesome CD, and you'll see a lot of people talking about that one as well. So that's DR scores, FLAC. So that's sort of one half of the story, right? Is this basically tells you, is there any data that is actually in the recording that resembles a wide dynamic range, something that would, or it's sort of like a picture, right? If you take an 8-bit image and upsample it to 24-bit without really changing any of the colors, yeah, you're storing it in 24-bit, but the actual values, when you look at the histogram, you're still within 255 colors. So you haven't necessarily changed anything, you just stored it in a better format. And that's sort of what happens with music, is if you're compressing down some CD into the 16-bit dynamic range, but you're selling it as 24-bit, 96 kilohertz 24-bit, but when they mastered it, it was dynamically compressed down to a 16-bit range, then yeah, you're basically wasting your money. You have it in a better format, but the data itself doesn't necessarily show that you should make that investment. So then back to his original point was, well, if the data is even there, so let's say we have a DR10 track, in a blind test, are you able to hear the two? And I definitely wouldn't sign up to do that test. He says, no, you don't hear a difference. And that's a perception thing. That comes down to, whether you're reviewing IEMs or the phone, how do you perceive music? How good is your hearing at what age? There's a lot of factors there. And he's probably right. Perception-wise, I'm not sure, unless you really, really pick the right track, that there's an actual difference between that and Spotify. If you just pick random tracks on Spotify versus MQA versus FLAC, I doubt that. I know I couldn't do it because my ears aren't that good, but it kind of comes down to that. Is the data there, yes or no? And then do you think you can perceive it? That's a maybe. I do like MQA tracks, and MQA tracks are essentially FLAC, lossless, recorded without, or recorded just the same as it was mastered. So it's not like Spotify 320 MP3 where they re-encode it. MQA is pretty much CD quality as it was recorded in the studio. So I do like it. I use it, and so if you do have FLAC tracks, like I do have some FLAC tracks, one of the handy things that I use is USB Audio Player Pro has this handy thing where yeah, it will most definitely play high-res audio tracks at the original bitrate. But what is handy for me is it actually will pull them from the server. So USB Audio Player Pro has this thing called UPnP, Universal Plug and Play DLNA servers. So you can click that and you can actually see my Plex server, which actually has a music section, which has FLACs, and here's Dido, Still in My Mind, FLAC version. And then, so even though this is actually stored on a Google Drive, my Plex server mounts it, has it, you still have sort of a seamless interface between here's all my FLACs, but at the same time, I still have all of my Tidal things all in one interface, one player. And you know what I said about USB Audio Player Pro is it, especially on the V30, it'll do all the Tidal MQA unfolding. It plays about as good quality as anything else on this phone, so that's good to my player of choice for that guy. And then on the Plex side, you get some other benefits of using Plex to host all these FLACs. So Plex is a media server. It actually runs on a PC in my house, and when you store FLACs, you can actually do, so if we pop open this guy, it's got a much nicer interface than USB Audio Player Pro, but it actually has the ability to store these for offline browsing. So even though USB Audio Player Pro can hit my server directly, if I'm out of the house, it cannot do that. So that's when I sort of, if I'm going on a trip and I want some music, either I'll use Tidal MQA offline, which will actually encode MQA offline, or this, which now we're offline, so I can't see it. So this has a sync version, and you can just say, go grab this whole album and load it locally to my phone. And then if we go all the way back here, you see downloads and sync, and there's Dido, Still in My Mind. It will transcode if you want. I usually store them as original, so that's original FLAC, and it will store that on your phone, and then you can play it just as you would if you were online, but now you're offline like I am now, and it'll start playing. So it's cool. So even if you kind of go down that path of buying FLACs, that's at least a cool, without going into a Roon or something crazy expensive. It's kind of the low budget version of how to have an audio server that can serve to your phones, but still have offline browsing if you go on a trip or something like that, which just happened to me a few weeks ago, and that's kind of what I did. It was a mix of Tidal offline and Plex offline, and awesome. So that's the story. So thank you for Anton for kind of bringing up that topic, and that's kind of my view. I'm not going to say FLACs are always worth it, but it's like MQA. If you like those versions and I like those versions, then go with it. That's your perception of it. But that's the story. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.